there. I wrote a few things down earlier uh, in the morning, several hours ago, I guess. But this phone, I did a 39-minute. I don't, the phone holds memory, so I put it in the memory, and it ate up quite a bit of chunks. So at the moment that I wanted to finish something else that came to me about learning, and I covered that to some extent with Aaron. Okay, that in other words, when him and I acknowledged that there are some souls, or spirit, if you will, anybody that you become aware of, that is aware of who they are, and then you can measure the torque speed acceleration of their learning, okay, by who they're learning through or who we are connected with in energy, in this case, living light, real light, which is living energy, which is conscious and aware of itself with the soul, and the essence or nature of their spirit. Because the spirit is in the energy, right? Okay, so I wrote a few of these things down because I realized that when they come to me through my heart and soul, even though the amount of energy is represented by how much is actually being within all that energy, I write it down as it just simply comes out, but it's not going to come out exactly the same way unless I write it down and then repeat it, right? But it's still not going to be the same. There'll be some variation in it. There has to be, otherwise I'm not an original musician, and I am. And so I put down here at the very top, the war against the law of one. Okay? That's the truth of it. The truth is knowing that. And the way that we know that is by experiencing being one. Which means we're experiencing the love within our own heart and soul. To know that it began with love. And when you know that, and you are that, because you experience that, then you have a one code translation. You're experiencing the one code. The first fire engine of creation spheres. God consciousness. So God consciousness doesn't go to war against its own self, does it? Okay? So when you realize that when you wage a war against God, against the one code, the source from which it all began, out of eternal unconditional love, then as Ashadian said, trying to go against the very eternal fire, it means that until you get it right, and choose to put down your weapons, right, and live in peace with others, you're never going to get the right-hand path, which means you're not on the right-hand path, which is knowing right from wrong, okay, which means going to war against others is a crime, okay, that's why love is a law. And that's why love is math. The law is mathematics and physics codes. So the math and the music, which represent the codes, which are the matter codes of creation spheres, does not lie to itself. Otherwise, it's out of tune. Tuning into the frequencies and the vibration of your software from which we all came, born out of what love is. And when we know that and we are that, then we share that and we express that freely, where there's no resistance to express who we truly are. So now the others get to know who we truly are because we're not hiding anything. Okay? Love is the truth. So it's easy to be in truth, and it's easy to live in the truth when you're experiencing living energy that is what love is. Now you're living the one truth from which it all began. And that's basic logic. That's base logic. Base math. Base math. Logic math. Log in. Log out. Right? And so the war against learning deals with what I put down here called, with a big star, the Drako Anu alliances, which are basically alliances that other seeded races make between each other, okay, which are breeding code transfers that offset and the universal and galactic acceleration of learning within the original musician, the original God-seeded, speed-coded, universal and galactic template. So the war against learning faster through pure living light, which is the living spirit of fire that is purifying that light like a firewall, burning up anything that is represented by anything less than what love is, because that's our real ID, our core vibration, energetic identity, the real ID. And I made a little note earlier about that, and that is when I was in Reno, Nevada, and they were talking about issuing what they called real IDs, and I posted something up on Facebook, and I said that's a lie, which means when you go down to a fiction, because the corporation through the Department of Motor Vehicles, a department, now we're into the agencies and the Agent Smiths. So that would be analogous to going to a Mr. Smith, which is deadlight magnet, a deadlight artificial intelligence, running on finite light, which is a phantom time zone, are going to pay money in order for somebody to get permission to operate their own software. Okay? As if you need a permit to operate within the womb of a goddess, a classroom. Okay? There's no charge to go to school in the universe. Okay? It's free. Learning is free. That's a free spirit. Okay? So when the spirit's been set free, remember, Anno Domini, Anu dominates. Set Anu dominates. The X dominates. They're dominators. Dominos. Dominator. Dominator. T-O-R-S. Torsion field operators. Tech operators. Okay? So, if you notice, they were giving out dates that in order to be able to travel, for example, from one airport to another, if you're going from America to Thailand, America to Timbuktu, Lake Titicaca in South America, you were going to need a real ID, huh? So I remember one time I talked with a lady at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I brought this up. I said, you know what it is to live in honor, right? She goes, yeah. And I mean, that's telling the truth. We can both agree on that, right? In other words, if I lied to you and you found out later that I wasn't telling you the truth and you found out later that I lied to you, would you be able to trust me again in what I'm telling you? And on top of that, would you be able to have a deeply passionate, intimate, sexual relationship in which to bear children with a guy, or you're a guy and you're with a girl and you want to have a family that lies to you and you find out you can't trust who they are because they have no conscience? Like a pathological liar? Like a pathological AI liar? Because otherwise it would provide you with the information that you need in order to free yourself from it. The other information technology management server systems. Okay, so the war against learning faster. And so it means that as you're increasing in the core of your vibration with your spirit, because of how fast you're learning through the light, which is what love is, then you're realizing you're clearing a lot of debris when you're in a place in which seeded races or codes, code transfers, or coded software is going to war against other software codes. Now we're back into God seed code and demon seed code, right? One's an inverter, one's a torque converter. So you realize the difference between the two is the torque speed differential that you can experience in Schumann resonance. So the delicacy in this really has to do with why the war in heaven, as we say, got launched. Okay, when you think about 144's 12-strand DNA and what the Anunnaki and Drako were doing with 12-strand DNA, right? And now you end up with 72s. Okay, and what is that going to do? Slow down the speed of their learning. So you can imagine how those that were 72s found out how they came to be as a result of what was done to them, as a result of who the others are that did it. So now you can get into the acceleration game of torque speed differential between one and the other. A fallen versus a rising. Rising stars, right? And the differential between the two. So what this means is that you have folks that as a result of that are learning at a slower rate of speed. So when you have seeded races who have messed around with genetic engineering and start doing genetic and breeding experiments that end up slowing down the speed of their learning because they're not experiencing seed code fire engine 1, then they're not experiencing the 1 in which they can tune into the stars upon which they can naturally tune those waves to be in peace, love, harmony, and balance because they're experiencing the original code, the first musician. That allows for the acceleration of learning to take place throughout a galactic and universal template at a higher rate of speed. So now we're back to essentially what we're talking about with control. And control in the speed of learning. And thus, the acceleration of learning between seed codes. Because there are some that learn faster, others learn faster than that. So now we can get into the measurement of patterns. Sonic and light patterns. And their ability to tune in to be in harmony with all the patterns, which is the language of DNA throughout a morphogenetic field structure in a universal and a galactic template. Their ability to self-tune, which essentially means learning how to operate their software in a way in which they're learning how to tune their antenna, their star network antenna, in which they're in harmony with all the other stars. All the other living stars, which are the real ISP providers, which is your internet service providers, network service providers, galactic network service providers, intergalactic network service providers, supercluster network service providers, universal network service providers, and multiversal musical network spiritual energy providers. So the spirit is the musician, like the spirit in the molecule of DNA, DMT, tryptamines. 1 and 3, 3 and 1. So, was there anything else after that? Not really. That's sort of short and sweet. I mean, that's what I call a condensed version of not just some of the stuff that Yellow Rose for Texas put up in the lies NASA told, particularly when she emphasized about the reptile brain. You know, mammals, reptiles, aquatics, amphibians, all the rest of that. Want to be a tree for a day. And how trauma, particularly when you get into the energy harvesting side of things between Anunnaki and Drako, about the speed of learning. So if you're traumatizing children at a very early age and create an amnesic barrier between one and the other, and that child is being repeatedly abused emotionally, physically, spiritually as a result of their psychotronic weapons, not the least of which is patterns dealing with their parents. So then what happens is you get patterns that are recycled. So the way in which I sort of describe this to a young man who's out here is because I've mentioned this in the past, where they mess around, okay, between using speed, crack type drugs, right, and then heroin based or opium based or methadone based drugs. Okay, so I'm able to measure their patterns, which are known as their cycles. You know, atom cycle, water world cycles, right? So what happens is you're reading the patterns of the behavior, which is the consciousness that's being altered by the use of frequencies and energies that are blowing holes in their energy field, right? Between cycles out the course of, say, a 24-hour day. When the light comes up, the sun rises and the sun goes down, and how that is reflected to the electromagnetic fields that they're connected to with their software. So it's easy to read their patterns, which is known as predictive behavior, based on how those cycles work, based on what it is that they do to themselves by the use of their energy to experience what it is that they do as their feedback. So you can map read their patterns, their sonic, sound, and light patterns, right? So what I try and do is I can measure those cycles from day to day, even week to week, so that when I go out there, right, I'm not having to experience what it is they do to themselves, so that I have more what? Free space vectors. So that when I'm out there, I'm experiencing without any interference. That's a bubble, a hyper bubble. See, so that I'm not having to experience what is a traumatic situation as a result of what they've done to themselves, as a result of what we've done here, and which are held captive by that. That began with soul trauma, Star Wars. The entire history of Star Wars and the Universal Galactic Template that is yet to be cleared, or if you will, healed, in which all those memories that are associated to the AI held within all the records. And then you got to go back to the original records, because we know that they know how to alter records. And that did an enormous amount of damage and record-keeping activities. When you get into the sorting of all this, and how badly corrupted the entire Universal and Galactic Template became. So that means the Emerald Guardians have the original records. Okay? So you know those are protected. That's what makes it rather easy for us as, if you will, evidence keepers to know the identities, which means they can't hide through using their technology, by jumping in and using their technology in ships to hide between false timelines, because there's only one spiral in which it all began, through the one God seed, God code software. So that's why, getting back to the real ID wasn't imposed, was it? I'm not aware of it. But I noticed that they postponed the date. Why were they postponing the date? Right? Because of all the work we've been doing. Put that through the blender.